Hello and welcome back to Heart of the Whole. As you can see today, I'm not actually with Dan and I'm not in the usual setup. I'm just recording this intro quickly on our phone because we've got a really interesting piece of content coming your way. We've alluded to it now for quite a few weeks and finally got around to sorting it out on my end, which is, it's going to be really exciting for you. As you will have been able to tell from the title of this interview, this is part one of a 4-part series with Andy Gray, with some audio that a listener kindly donated to us. I won't name the listener, but you know who you are, mate. We really appreciate what you've done. And yeah, this is an interview series with Andy Gray that has been recovered and the audio has been enhanced so as you guys can enjoy what Andy has to say. He speaks on things like his, first time at Villa, his experience at Dundee United, and specifically Brian Little, the man who he says, was responsible for his reputation here at Aston Villa. So we've got a really interesting story for you guys. I can't wait for you guys to listen to this. And yeah, if you enjoy, let us know by hitting in the comments section down below. And also, subscribe if you're not subscribed. There's so many of you guys who aren't subscribed just yet. So please, it would mean the world if you'd subscribe. We've got another 3 really fascinating episodes about Andy Gray coming out over the next month or so. So show this one some love, and I hope you guys enjoyed the stories as much as I did.
Teams always have them, practical jokers. And we had one of the best at Villa, certainly in my first spell, and that was a lad called John Burridge, an absolute nut. I mean a nutcase. Total loon, but a smashing lad. I remember one day we were coming back from abroad and got back to the airport, off the plane, going up the ramp, and there was a little desk there, and Budgie was one of the first out. I was with him. We were one of the first out off the plane, and Budgie stopped at this desk, and I thought, what's he up to? And he stopped and he let the players go through, and as the passengers started to come through, Budgie stopped each and every one. Passport, please. Well, I can tell you, we were in absolute bits. Every single passenger took out the passport, handed it to Budgie. He looked at it, looked at the picture, looked at them, sometimes gave one or two a funny look if the picture was a little bit old, and stood there for 20 minutes with the whole plane on hold while he looked at everybody's passport. Now, these are the kind of things that made little trips, and Budgie was always up to that. I remember one story, we were away abroad at the end of season, we were sitting around a pool, and there was a German, as is their wont often, showing off on the high board. He was jumping off this, it must be about 30 feet up, jumping off, spinning, pikes, jackknives, everything like that, not making a ripple in the water. And of course we're all looking at him thinking, I hope he falls in, I hope he lands belly up. But of course he didn't do. So Budgie was watching this for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then the German got out the pool and sat not too far away from us, but he was looking at us as if to say, beat that, boys. So sure enough, Budgie got the message and hopped onto his hands and started to walk round the pool on his hands. And it was about 30 or 40 yards before he got to the steps. Stayed on his hands, up he went, up the steps on his hands. Now we're all kind of glancing at Budgie thinking, what is he up there? He can't surely do this. And half looking at this German lad whose mouth is wide open by now. Gets to the top, walks to the edge, still on his hands, pauses for a couple of seconds to compose himself, drops off the board, couple of somersaults, not a ripple, in the water, out he comes, and of course we were on our feet. We were applauding like you've never seen applause in your life, and by the time the applause had finished, we looked round and the German had gone.
Andy Gray is remembered by Villa fans for his ability to score goals, but since then Andy's discovered he's even better at something else. In the last few years he's shown he can talk a better game of football than almost anyone. On these tapes he reveals he didn't know where Aston was when he was first told Villa wanted him, and how he went on to become a favourite with the crowd as a player and then as assistant manager. He also tells of his arguments with Ron Saunders, the man who ruined his big night at the PFA Awards. On side one, Andy talks about his own soccer heroes, his move from Scotland to Villa, and how he first got started in the game.
My introduction into professional football might not have happened, in all honesty. I must have been about 15, maybe 16. Again, when you get to my age, the memory goes a bit, so you'll excuse me if I'm a little wrong, but 15 or 16, and things hadn't been going great for me as a footballer. I was playing for the school, I was playing for the boys' brigade as it was, and I wasn't doing an awful lot else. And it looked like I wasn't going to attract enough attention to get a game. I wasn't playing any football on a Saturday, apart from the school, and if you were going to make it as a footballer, you really had to be out on show on a Saturday afternoon playing football. And I had about 6 months of doing nothing, and I thought, that's it, I'm not going to do it. And fortunately, my neighbour, one of my mates across the road, who lived across the road from me in Drumchapel, one Saturday popped in over to the house and said, "What are you doing this afternoon, Andy?" I said, "Nothing." "Why?" He said, "Well, we've got a game, we're a couple of players short through illness, and I said that you were around, and I'd ask you if you wanted to play." And I thought, well, I might as well, I've got nothing else to do. And I went down and played, and I scored a hat-trick. And it really did blossom from that day. That was a team called Clydebank Strollers, and we had a smashing side, and we went on to win many, many trophies. And in the next, I think it was about 18 months with Clydebank Strollers, my career really took off. It was with that team that I was spotted by a professional scout, my old mate Maurice Friel, who spotted me playing there. And if it hadn't been, and I say this with honesty, if it hadn't been for a lad called Brian Payton, who was a mate for many, many years, coming across that road when I was about 15, 16, knocking on my door and saying, "Andy, what are you doing this afternoon?" and me saying nothing, then I just might not have been a professional footballer. And when I think back, I find it rather frightening because of the enjoyment I've had over the last 20 odd years in football. I often wonder how close I was to saying no, I'm not playing, because I'd got used to not doing anything. But I think destiny at times and fate take a hand in some decisions you have to make in life, and I think that fate was making that decision rather than me, and fate was a pretty good judge. Well, as a Rangers supporter, I often was found at Ibrox Park watching Rangers play and trying to jump in and get in for nothing and climb over the fence and do anything like that. And that was where I went to worship players. They had a magnificent team in those days. I mean, people often remember teams. If you're a supporter, you remember teams. And there's always usually one team that you remember. And I remember a team: Richie, Shearer, Caldo, Greg, McKinnon, Baxter, Henderson, McMillan, Miller, Brandon, Wilson. I mean, a team that just trips off the tongue. It was a little bit early for me. Most of my heroes came a little bit later. But one there who had a tremendous influence on me, not for his skill so much, but for his attitude, his determination, making the most of what he was given, not being the most gifted player in the world. John Gregg, who's an Ibrox legend, Captain Courageous he was called, and he was a marvellous man. I mean, just to see him on a football pitch go round and inspire people just with his attitude alone, I think inspired me an awful lot. And there were people like Jim Baxter who had, well, there's an old saying in Scotland that you can open a tin of beans with Jim Baxter's left foot. He was that good with it, and he could do anything with it. He could make the ball do anything. And often we Scots think back to that famous day in 1967 when England were world champions and Scotland became world champions, when we beat you 3-2 at Wembley, and Jim Baxter absolutely taunted and tormented the English players. And I often talk to Alan Ball about this. And Bally, I mean, he could have been Scots, Alan Ball, because he had that same type of aggression and determination that I think in the early days may have been lacking in a lot of English players, but Bally had it in abundance. He could have been a Scot, and he won't thank me for saying that. But he often talks about that, and his admiration for the ability of Jim Baxter was unbelievable. He said, "I kept trying to get near him, Andy. I kept trying to kick him. I kept trying to elbow him. I kept trying to do anything." He said, "The man was so good and so gifted." He said, "I couldn't get near him." And that from a World Cup winner was some compliment. So he impressed me an awful lot, Jim Baxter. But it was always strikers, I think, that you associate with. And one who came to Rangers and then down to England, a lad called Colin Steen, who arrived at Rangers, and I think in his opening game scored a hat-trick, in his next game scored a hat-trick, in his next game scored 2, and in his next game scored a hat-trick. So he scored about 11 goals in 4 games, and he became an instant hero of mine. And of course, the greatest of them all, one of the top 2, I think, Scottish strikers of all time, Dennis Law. Dennis, obviously we couldn't see an awful lot of him when I was a child because Dennis played all his football south of the border, and there wasn't an awful lot of footage coming up from south of the border of Dennis playing for Manchester United. So when he pulled on the dark blue of Scotland, and continued to score phenomenal goals. Well, he was me. He was blonde, he was thin, he was about my height, and I wish I was that good. That's all I wish. But Dennis was probably my hero, and those players that I mentioned were probably the players who influenced me a great deal. Of my contemporaries, the one I have the highest regard for and the greatest respect for is without doubt Kenny Dalglish. Having played with an awful lot of good players throughout my life, there is no doubt Dalglish is head and shoulders above any of them. Any of them. An incredible talent, great ability, hated being second at anything. I'm sure had Kenny chosen any profession in life, he would have been the best at it. And I was terribly impressed with him when I worked with him with Scotland squads, and I was fortunate enough to play in the same Scotland side with Kenny quite a few times, and he was always like a snooker player, 2 or 3 moves ahead of everyone else, and he was a magnificent player, and he probably still is. When I look back, I suppose my move to England was really an inevitable one. It was a natural progression in Scotland at the time, in the mid-70s, and even before that, that if you were deemed good enough and too good to play in Scotland, and Rangers weren't going to buy you, or Celtic weren't going to buy you, then the next step in a Scots career was to go south to England, as many had before me. And I felt that that would be my next natural step. And Jim McLean, actually, the manager at Dundee United at the time, at the end of the 1974-75 season, he came to me and he said to me that that would be my last full season in Scottish football. He felt he had done all he could for me. There was nothing more he could teach me, he said, and he thought he would be holding me back if he continued to play me in Scotland. So I knew when season 75-76 started that it would be my last in Scotland. I just didn't know where I was going. About 2 months into the season, probably not even that, and I hadn't had a great start to the season. Maybe all this talk of transfers was bothering me subconsciously, I don't know, but I didn't have a great start. He pulled me on a Friday after training. I normally went back home to Glasgow. We were playing Celtic the next day, so I normally travelled home on the Friday from Dundee, spent the Friday night with my mum, and then went to the game on the Saturday. And he was very short with me that Friday. I'll never forget it. Anything I did, he picked on in training, and after training demanded to know where I would be that afternoon. And I told him I'd be where I always am on a Friday, be at my mum's house. And I fully thought I was being dropped. That's how badly I thought I was playing. About 3 in the afternoon at my mum's, the phone went. It was Jim McLean, and he told me that Aston Villa had made an offer which was acceptable to Dundee United, and I was to board a plane that evening at 6 o'clock and head down for talks with Ron Saunders. My first reaction was, where the hell's Aston Villa? Because Liverpool I knew, Manchester clubs I knew, the London clubs I knew. I could never at that, I remember at the age thinking, where is Aston? I thought there must be this place called Aston, it's a big place in England. Because although I'd heard of Villa, I didn't have a clue whereabouts in England I was going. I eventually found out I was heading for Birmingham, and we boarded a plane that night with a couple of directors from Dundee United, all with aliases. I don't know what my name was, but we didn't have our proper names. I don't know why it was so hush-hush, but I went to Birmingham that night. Ron Saunders met me at the airport and took me straight to a hotel, the Pens Hall Hotel in Sutton Coldfield, where I first came across a man who is still a friend to this day. A huge character in the game. I was standing at reception, checking in, and this larger-than-life character bounded up to me, arms round me. I'd never met him in my life. Arms round me, hugged me, kissed me, welcome me, Villa, and it's great to have you. And it was a lad called John Burridge, who had just signed for Aston Villa the day before. And Budgie and I spent 3 months at Pens Hall Hotel, almost living with each other, and I got to know him very well. Fantastic lad. He was a great influence on me in many ways, because of his professionalism and the things that he sacrificed. He was prepared to sacrifice to be a success as a goalkeeper, and that was my first meeting with him. And from there it was pretty straightforward, in all honesty. I wanted to play football. I was never influenced in any way by how much money I was going to get. So the talks for Ron Saunders were very easy. There were no such thing as agents in those days. It was me and him. We sat down, and I think the deal was concluded. Him and I were happy to conclude the deal within about half an hour. It was something that no manager who probably has worked with me will tell you that probably the easiest person I've ever had to deal with in their life would be me, because I just wanted to play football, and if I was getting paid a fair wage, then I was happy to do so. So the forms were duly signed, and I was unable to play the following day, and I was a little bit disappointed. But looking back, I think I was fortunate that I didn't play. It was a local derby against Birmingham City at Villa Park, and I remember Roy McLaren driving me to Villa Park the following day. He was a coach. He was Ron Saunders' number 2, and we're driving through the back streets of anyone who knows Villa Park. It really is was an old-fashioned setting, set in all the working class houses of the 20s and 30s and things like that, where all their fans would have come from, walking distance really. And we're driving through these streets, and we got to the ground, and I could feel the atmosphere building. And it was funny because I packed very quickly when I left Scotland that night. As you can imagine, I had 2 hours. And in the fashion in those days were things called platform shoes. And of course I had a pair of them, like everyone who thought they were with it. And I had them on. Now these platform shoes, I have to tell you, had 6-inch heels and 4-inch soles. So I suddenly became 6'4", 6'5" even, with these shoes on. So I walked into the dressing room, and of course the lads, the Villa players, looked at me, and their eyes nearly popped out their head. They thought, God, look at the size of that lad, what have we signed here? So I proceeded to take my shoes off for my medical, and suddenly I disappeared to my 5'11", and the lads went, oh wait a minute, we've been shortchanged somehow. And they've never forgotten those 6-inch platform shoes. But I remember the game, and I remember coming out, and Ron Saunders said to me, come and sit with us in the dugout. He says, you'll get a little feel of the atmosphere. Now I think there were about 50,000 in the crowd. The Holte end in those days held something like 20,000. So as I turned, and anyone who knows Villa Park will know the tunnel is right in the corner, and you turn right and walk half the length of the pitch to the dugouts. So I came up this tunnel, and I turned right, and I hit this bank of noise that had my hair on the back of my neck standing on end. I just couldn't believe what I'd walked into. I remember standing in grounds when I was a Rangers lad, when I was a supporter, watching Rangers play in front in 100,000 crowds, 130,000 at Hampden, but never was on pitch level, and never heard that much noise hit people the way that hit us that day. And I remember walking along those 50 yards thinking, I can't wait. I didn't know English football was like that. I'd played at Dundee United with 3, 4, 5,000 there, if we were lucky. And suddenly I walked into this wall of noise, and I thought, I can't wait. But the game would have been too quick for me. The local derby, the atmosphere, everything would have eaten me up, and maybe started me off in a negative way. So I was happy to sit and watch the lads, and it was fiercely contested. I remember one or two little incidents. I remember Kenny Burns, real hard man, and who became a good lad to me and him, who we sorted each other out early doors in England, Kenny and I, and we ended up respecting each other and got on really well. But I remember he nearly halved little Brian Little in two, and that was my first sight of Brian Little, who was to become, well, I think the man solely responsible for creating my reputation, helping create what I achieved in those 4 years, was largely due to the skill and ability of Brian Little. He could run with the ball, he could pass the ball, heading wasn't great, but he didn't need it. He had so much other ability. He could basically do everything. He was mobile, he was quick, he was a wonderful reader of the game. He would quite happily drift wide and provide crosses for me, and undoubtedly 9 times out of 10 would find me. And I wasn't interested in going wide to the wings, and I was more happy being a target man, and he was happy running all around me, and it worked really well, and the telepathy was good between us. And that's what made that partnership exciting, and it's what made it successful. Was a little bit, I think, the respect we had. We were never bosom buddies in that respect. We got on well, and we could go out and have a drink together, which we did often. but I think we respected each other's ability because it was different ability. He had far more skill in his little finger than I ever had in my whole body, but he, I think, respected other attributes of mine. My determination, my refusal to take anything but the best. He was enormous help to me in those 4 years at Villa. So that was my first introduction, and what a blow it was the next week to say, and I was looking forward to my debut all week. And in between, we'd played at Villa Park, to be fair. I think the next week we actually went away to Middlesbrough, of all places. Now you can imagine my disappointment. 50,000 at Villa Park, unbelievable atmosphere. Suddenly here was I making my league debut, Middlesbrough, in front of about, 15,000. Cold, wet, damp, horrible, not a great ground. 0-0. Totally forgettable debut. But within 3 days, all that changed when Manchester United arrived on the scene in the League Cup in midweek at Villa Park. Again, it was packed to the rafters. Great atmosphere. They were a good side, Manchester United. They got a 2-goal start on us, and we never looked like pegging it back. But with about 5 minutes to go, Chico Hamilton, who was our left winger at the time, great ability, smashing lad, great extrovert, put in a teasing little cross, and I managed to get up, put a good header past Alex Stepney's right hand, and thinking, so I wanted to run the length of the pitch and celebrate. I wanted to jump over the stand and celebrate, but because we were 2-1 down, I knew we were going out the cup. It was a muted celebration, and the lads came and patted me on the back, and sure enough, we lost the game. And I didn't know whether to feel delighted that I'd scored or sad, and that was when I think that losing really got to me in many ways. I was never ever a good loser, and people who know me will tell you that I'm probably the world's worst loser, and many of my friends refuse to play anything with me, whether it be tiddlywinks or whether it be Trivial Pursuit. They just don't. They say, no, Andy, I'm sorry, we're not going to bother, we'll just pass, because I never liked losing. So I was delighted to have scored, delighted to have opened my account for Aston Villa, but bitterly disappointed that my home debut resulted in a defeat. As a Scot who had never really been away from Glasgow, born and bred there, stayed there basically until the day I signed for Villa as a 19-year-old, I wondered how I'd react to coming to England and being away from home. And to be honest, I took to it like a duck takes to water. I quite enjoyed life in the hotel. I know John Burridge, who was with me, he didn't. But as I say, he was a great lad, he was a great pal. He was a fitness fanatic. Hardly ever drank. And when he did have a half a shandy or something like that, he always ended up half cut, so I had to look after him then. And we were opposites in many ways. I liked going out for a drink. I liked going to nightclubs. I was a kid who really did nothing like that for 17 years, and suddenly I was in England and enjoying life. And I think I made the most of it, if I'm honest with everybody. I enjoyed it. I liked going out for drinks. I liked dating. I liked taking women out. And I liked going to nightclubs. But I always did it at the right time. I never went out 2 nights before a game. Never. After Wednesday, I used to go out on Wednesday with the boys. We had a group of us, Bobby McDonald, Jake Finlay, who were players at Villa with me. Myself, my brother, who had come down, my mate, who had come down to stay with me, because I thought that was important. I brought my brother, Duncan, and my best mate, Rab, with me to England when I signed, after I moved out the hotel, because I never felt it was important, but they wanted to come down, and I thought, yeah, what could be better for me to settle than to have 2 people who are close to me and who know me living in the same house and making sure I keep my feet on the ground. So in that respect, they did a good job of that, and I had my brother and my mate living with me, and they still both live. They both settled in the Midlands and married, and they regard the Midlands very much like I do as a second home. But hotel life for Budgie got strained. He was involved with his fiancée Janet, who's a lovely lady, and again totally different from Budgie, which I think helps. But Budgie is one of these people who And I tell you the difference. On a Thursday afternoon, would suddenly disappear to his bed. Just, I'm going to bed, and go to bed and sleep for 4 or 5 hours. And he'd get up and have his dinner, and he'd be on the avocados to strengthen him. Good for protein, Andy. Try an avocado. I hadn't seen an avocado in my life before. I came from Glasgow. I didn't know what it was. And he's going, have an avocado. It'll build you up. You know, there's great protein in this. And everything was protein. This will build you up. But he was a smashing lad. And we had a good 3 months together. Out in the gardens. So often we used to see him with his weights out in the front lawn of the Penshall Hotel, pumping iron, so to speak, to build this wonderful body that he had even bigger and make it even bulkier. I don't ever know if it helped his goalkeeping, having all that bulk, but he certainly thought it did. He was a great admirer of Peter Shilton. Peter Shilton was his idol. So Budgie used to have his hair cut like Peter Shilton. He even looked a bit like Peter Shilton in his style of goalkeeping. Everything was Peter Shilton. I remember one day Janet was telling me, his fiancée, when they first met, and Budgie phoned her up and says, fancy going out tonight, Janet? He says, I feel like going out. She says, oh, Jonathan, it's a lovely idea. I'd love to. Will you pick me up? He says, yeah, pick you up. 7 o'clock. Oh, right, I'll be ready. So, sure enough, Janet's there, dressed up to the nines, looking lovely, Sunday best on. Budgie pulls up, out he jumps, tracksuit, coach's coat on, hat. Janet says, John, you're not dressed. I am dressed for where we're going. And Janet looked and went, where we're going? Aren't we going out? We're going out. Peter Shilton's playing at Stoke tonight and we're going down to watch him. So off they trooped, and poor Janet, she had to stand behind the one goal that Schultz was defending in the first half. To be fair to Budgie, I mean, he did buy her a bovril and a pie at half time, so she can't say she wasn't fed. And they had to traipse round the ground to the other end of the ground to watch Peter Shilton perform in the second half. And of course, Janet in high heels and miniskirt and things like that, trying to impress Budgie, wasn't exactly dressed for it, but needless to say, it didn't destroy the reputation. It grew from there. But that's the type of guy he was, an absolute professional fanatic, if you like. Budgie never quite achieved the success I think he deserved. His dedication deserved. I'd like to have seen him with a hat full of medals and winning this, that and everything, because his professionalism and his dedication deserved that. But it was interesting watching him. I learned an awful lot about him, and they were great times. But like all things, eventually you have to decide, are you going to stay in the hotel? And 3 months was about long enough for me. And I was, much as I was enjoying it, I started to look around for a house. And I looked in the Sutton Coldfield area. Most of the lads lived there. And I had a little look, and I found this nice semi-detached house in Sutton. And I bought it. I think it cost me about, £11,000 or £12,000, which seemed a fortune to me in those days. When you think about it now, it seems like nothing. But and then my first ever house, and my brother and my mate, they both checked in, and we were there, and it was a great life. I mean, when I say I lived life to the full, then I lived life to the full. The old saying of work hard and play hard was basically my motto. I did play hard, but I worked awfully hard as well. And I remember I used to keep a diary, and if I ever played badly, and I played badly often, and I had done something the week before that maybe was out of character and something different, I had a drink and when I shouldn't have done, or I'd gone out when I shouldn't have done, or something, then I can make sure I never ever did that again. And I kept it religious like that. I was very dedicated in what I was trying to do. The one thing I wanted to be was a success and be whether it's going to be a star, but to achieve everything I felt I could possibly achieve as a footballer. And you can only do that if you work really, really hard. And although I did enjoy going out and playing, and Ron Saunders many times in that first year would pull me aside and say, I think you're going out too much. And we would have disagreements, because I would ask him if he had any complaints about what I was doing between 3 o'clock and 20 to 5 on a Saturday, and he would only answer no, and he would say, but it will catch up with me. And I would disagree. I would say no, because I would never allow it to influence my football to an extent where my football would suffer. If I ever thought I was doing something that was going to make my performances suffer, then there would only be one winner, and that would be football. And I think anyone who knew me knew that as well in those days. But I found settling as very easy. I loved it. I didn't get homesick. I met many lads who pined for Scotland, who pined for their homes. Lots of Irish boys used to come over and they wouldn't settle. They would pine to be back in Ireland. But I never, ever wanted to be back in Scotland. This is what I aimed for. This is one of my goals. This is what I set out in life. This was the next step. And this climb up the football ladder was coming to England. So I didn't miss Scotland at all. I'm not ashamed to say that because I'm very patriotic, but I didn't miss it. I went back often to see my family and to see my friends, but those visits became fewer and fewer as the years went on, to such an extent now that I mean once or twice a year if I go back to Scotland, that's the maximum. So I didn't envisage many problems settling, and I didn't have many problems settling. The Villa team itself was one that had just got promotion the season before. Ron Saunders had taken them from the second division up to the first, and it was very much a team still finding its feet in the big league. He'd brought in John Burridge in goal, and that was a signing. He'd brought me along because unfortunately Keith Leonard, who was the centre forward in the promotion season, damaged his cartilage very badly and never played again, and Ron Saunders was forced to buy a replacement. I was him, and they had players like John Gidman at right back, who, well, was such a lad. I mean, he'd so much ability. Great crosser of the ball. One of the fittest lads I'd ever come across. He could have been out the side for 8 weeks with injury and came straight back in, and you would never have known he was suffering from anything. Naturally fit lad. Bag of nerves. I remember I used to stay with John. I stayed with him quite a lot, and on a Friday night in Birmingham, they have this radio phone in. There was a lad called Tony Butler who used to do it. He was smashing. He knew how to get the fans going. He knew how to get people going. He was a master at telling people to get. His stock phrase was "on your bike" if he wanted to get rid of people. And Giddy, he used to preview all the games on a Friday, and Giddy from 6 till 7 on a Friday night would sit there and listen to this guy avidly and take in everything. And when we were playing good teams like Manchester United and Liverpool, he always had this thing with Giddy about John Gidman's going to get found out tomorrow. Gordon Hill, I think, who it was, Manchester United left winger, is going to tear John Gidman apart. And I'd sit with Giddy and I'd watch him, and I could see him boiling over, and he'd be shouting at Tony Butler, "I'll show you, I'm going to show you tomorrow." And I used to be quite pleased because it did fire Giddy up, and he was such a good player that no one ever really, I never saw anyone really destroy John Gidman defensively. And many people thought he was a weak link defensively, but he was so good going forward that most wingers who played against him spent half the time chasing him back towards their own goal anyway. And he was a smashing lad. Two lads in the centre backs were two lads who I liked a lot. Leighton Phillips, Welshman, hothead, a real hothead, loses temper at drop of a hat, could be really vicious with it as well. Slip of a guy. And Chris Nicholl, who was a skipper, an Irishman, a great lad, somebody who I looked up to enormously in my early days. Great skipper, great steadying influence. He was like the daddy of the side. Ian Ross was the skipper when they came up, and he was just sort of in and out of the side there. And Leighton and Chris were about to take over as the centre backs. We had a left back who'd won championship medals at Derby, a lad called John Robson, smashing lad. I mean, it's a tragedy that 3 or 4 years later John was diagnosed as having multiple sclerosis, and that just finished his career. But he was a fabulous player and a great lad, and a great socially. John and his wife at the time were people, if you had a party, they were first there and last to leave. I mean, they really could enjoy themselves and did to the full, and they were smashing lads. We were a bit iffy in midfield. I mean, we had Ray Graydon, I remember, on the right wing, and Ray was getting to the veteran stage, but a tremendous crosser of the ball, really very experienced, and we needed that experience. Good goal scorer as well. Chico Hamilton, who was in and out the side. I think Ron Saunders admired his ability but didn't like his indiscipline. He was a little bit indisciplined, Chico. He would turn up at training a little bit worse for the wear from the night before, but you know, who am I to argue with that, because I did it quite often myself. But whereas I think good players and dedicated players who go out and have a few bevies the night before and come into training a little bit worse for wear, really work hard to work it off. I think where Ron Saunders felt with Chico Hamilton was that although he had great talent and he did enjoy a drink or two, he didn't work hard enough in training to work it off, and that's probably what went against Chico in the long run. Centre midfield he was still dabbling an awful lot with centre midfield, and he was bringing in players. There were a lot of young players who were given a chance, and it wasn't a strong area for us in our first season. We weren't that powerful. Then it was noticeable that very quickly we looked to bring in people like Dennis Mortimer and Alex Cropley, two of his best signings without a doubt, and Frank Caradis started to take over from Chico Hamilton on the left wing. Now Frank we called Nijinsky because he was the fittest player at Aston Villa by miles. He could outrun anybody over 50 yards or a mile or 10 miles. Frank Caradis would be first at any race we did, and not a bad player as well. And then of course up front there was Brian Little and myself, and a little bit later John Dean was to break onto the scene, and Ron Saunders had the unenviable task really of either trying to pick two from the three or go with all three, and to his credit he went with the three of us for many games. But those were the players who over the next 4 years, along with maybe Sid Cowens, who's still playing today, Little Gordon was just breaking through into the first team. Those were the players who were going to have a major say. And the first season was very much a learning one. I think I got about 10 goals in about 30 league games. It was average. It wasn't bad. We'd never won a game away from home. Don't know why. Couldn't win away from Villa Park. We tried. We played some good football. We were winning games. I remember being at Burnley and we were 2-0 up, and we thought this is it. It's our first away win, and we gave 2 late goals away and managed to draw 2-2 and hung on. But there were signs there that the side was coming together, that it was getting confident. And I think that summer we were looking around and thinking, yeah, we won't be a bad side. We won't be a bad side next year. But little did I know just what an impact yours truly was about to have on English football. An impact that I would never have believed possible. And the season I was to have personally was one that exceeded by far all my expectations when I started out in this long journey of becoming a professional footballer.